everybody, welcome back to another session of our flipped classroom. And tonight we're going to talk about party systems. We'll talk about majoritarian versus pluralism, and I hope everybody's had a good first week in class and at the academy in general. Be sure, if there's anything that I'm saying on these flipped classroom sessions, that you either shoot me an email, you can put it on Twitter, you can put it on the group page on Facebook, or you could even ask me face-to-face in class if we'll ever have some time together, which we will next week. So let's get started with this tonight. So I'm talking mainly about your Chapter 2 readings from Janda. This does spill over a little bit into Chapter 3, just a little, but we'll talk more about that next week. So the first thing I want you to do is go over to the PowerPoint that's on our wiki page for this first unit and look on slide 15, and you're going to see a slide about party systems. And the one that we're most familiar with, because that's the one that we have grown up with, would be democracy. And the word democracy comes from, as you see in the Janda reading, two ideas. Demo meaning masses, and then kratos meaning power, so power to the masses. And it's been said before that democracy is the best idea of a lot of really bad ideas. And there's a lot of merit in that, but when you think about democracy, just breaking it down, power to the masses, is that really what we have? Do we really have it set up so that people, everybody in the United States, is able to have a say? And it's not really that way. If you were to think about it, if every single person had a say in the United States and we all had direct democracy, that would be highly inefficient, because every single person would be casting a vote, every single person would have to be informed about every issue, and then we'd have to set up polling for that issue. We'd have to go to the polling place or figure out a way to cast our votes electronically and make sure that all the votes are verified. So you can see it'd be a pretty big mess. So instead, we have representative democracy. So we elect people to represent our interest and then vote on our behalves. But there's a couple of different issues even beyond that, and that's what we're going to talk about tonight. But before we get into that, let's look at the other models that you might not be as familiar with. So if you go to slide 15 in the PowerPoint, you see this chart, and on the left side it's going to say one party, two party, and multi-party. So with a one-party system, that's really what you have. You have one party, and what you have to win in a one-party system is the plurality. This is different from a majority. Majority does not equal plurality. A plurality just means more votes than anybody else. It could be even one more vote than any other party. It could be one more vote than any other person. So the problem with that is that you don't have a clear mandate of the people to rule. In other words, think about it this way. Think if you have 15 different political parties or candidates running for a position of government, and the election or the votes are spread out basically if evenly between these 15 candidates, but one candidate gets just a few more votes than any of the other ones. Well, there's 14 other candidates or 14 other political parties who are representing the interest of 14 different categories of people in that country that are going to feel very disenfranchised or unhappy with the election of this one other party or this one other candidate. So in a one-party system, what that one winner has to do is immediately gobble up as much power and control as they can. So they go and look for a military to back them up. They look for a lot of signs of force. They might even go after the candidates or the leaders of the other political parties who they defeated, so they can try to snuff out all elements of opposition. And there's a great Shepard Fairey art print that I want to show you on Monday that shows this idea of a tyrannical government trying to snuff out opposition. And we'll see what you can pull from this picture. Anyway, an advantage, as you can see from the chart, an advantage of this system is it's extremely efficient. I mean, if you have one ruler or one political party, you've snuffed out all the other opposition. If you want something done, you get it done. You just do what you want to do. There's no voices to tell you that you can't, because they're afraid of dying. So the disadvantage of this, though, is that there are no freedoms. There is no opposition. There's no voice of other opinions. All the control is going to lie on one person. And the examples that I give on the chart you can see on the side there, and you probably could have guessed a few of these. The reason I put 4% for China is that on average, the Communist Party rules or gets about 4% of the vote. If we're honest about it. Now, the Chinese government's going to report something much different, but on average, they're going to get about 4% of the vote. That means that the other percentages are spread out throughout other parties in China. So you might be thinking, why is it that those other groups don't just form coalitions to overthrow the Communist Party? Well, the reason that they don't, or the reason they haven't, is because the Chinese government, the Communist Party, owns so much of the military and arms, so these opposition groups aren't able to do that. Now, there are some countries where the opposition has been able to gain enough control to overturn the government, and that's sort of what's been happening with the Arab Spring that we'll be talking about a little bit more this year, and some other revolutions throughout the world. Okay, the two-party system is what we're used to. So you've got two main parties that are representing the narrow middle of the country's political ideology, and they more or less swap positions, exchange power, participate regularly. When you have one party take over after another party, your country doesn't really suffer any type of political whiplash or ideological pains from going from one ideology or one political party to the next. And the good thing about that is that your country is going to be pretty stable. It does appeal to the greatest amount of people because those two parties are in the middle, and so you're able to avoid the extremes on the ideological left and right. The problem with this is that there still are not very many third voices of opposition. Those two dominant parties are the ones that control the nation's interest for the most part. Now, this is starting to change a little bit in the United States, but traditionally, even from the time of the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists, or the Democratic Republicans and the Federalists, it was a two-party system. Those parties have changed their names throughout the past 2 centuries. We've had the Whigs, we've had the Democrats fall out of that, and the Republicans eventually emerged in the 1860s, and so that's what we're left with today. But for the most part, we've been a two-party system. Then you have a multi-party system, and with a multi-party system, you do have to have a majority, which would be at least more than 50%, a little more than half of the votes. And what happens a lot of times in a multi-party system, let's say that you have 3 parties, 3 political parties, and I can demonstrate this a little bit better in class, I think, on Monday when we're all together. But you've got 3 parties. Let's say that the election is mainly between 2 parties, but neither of these 2 parties clearly has the majority, or 50 plus 1% of the vote. So what this party right here will do is go to this third party that had no chance, and they'll form a coalition. The people who originally would have voted for this party now vote for this coalition party, and they're able to defeat this other party. So you have a newly created party, a coalition. The problem is there was something to start that they disagreed with, and that's why they had 2 different parties. That's going to emerge again sometime in the future, and it's going to start to pull the party back apart. So if you've got blue, green, and yellow, the yellow-green party will start to have some disagreements and pull apart. Who's going to be the leader of this yellow-green party? That's a big question. And where are they going to draw the line on many of the ideological differences that they had to begin with? You'll see this in a lot of countries with very old parliaments or setups similar to a parliament, like in Germany and Israel, and also in Japan. Okay, so there's your party system setup. So what we have is a 2-party system. We have representative democracy, and through our readings you saw that there are 2 main views on democracy. So the first view would be a procedural view, and we place a lot of focus on who should participate. In the procedural view, everybody should participate. We have universal suffrage. Suffrage is the right to vote. It has nothing to do with pain. Suffrage is just the right to vote. The second thing that we ask is, how much should each vote count? And we say that each vote should count the same. We've come a long way from the time that we had 3/5 vote to a 3/5 compromise. We'll talk a little bit more about that this week in the formation of our Constitution. Then the third question that we ask is, how many votes are needed to reach a decision? And in our 2-party system model, we've decided that a majority, or 50% plus 1, and if there's no winner, we take, between 2 candidates, we take a plurality. Moving on from that. The second view that we discuss would be a substantive view of democracy. And with the substantive view, the main thing that's guarded is the substance of our democracy. It's much more than the procedure. So that probably didn't make a lot of sense when you first read that. So let me explain that a little bit. In the previous perspective, or the procedural view, whoever is elected is going to represent the views of the people that elected them, no matter what. In the substantive view of democracy, they realize, people who hold this view realize that if the masses elected someone to represent them in office, and what the masses wanted to happen was some type of majority discrimination on a minority group. Maybe there's a faction of people who elect representatives and they say, we want to get rid of the First Amendment. Well, the substantive view of democracy realizes we have some fundamentals that we should not get rid of, regardless of the wishes of the masses. And so the substantive view of democracy would say we should protect civil liberties and rights and freedoms. We should protect the Bill of Rights in general. We should protect the Constitution. The difficulty is that we do agree on what civil liberties are. We agree on what it says in the Bill of Rights, but not everybody agrees on what social rights like housing or health care or even education when it comes to what the government should provide. And there's not really a clear measurement on whether or not what the government does is democratic, or if it goes too far, if it breaks one of those three things that we talked about in the first chapter with freedom, order, and equality. Is the government stepping into our personal lives a little bit too much? So the problem with procedural would be minority rights. The minorities may not be given a voice. The majoritarian model of democracy, or having a majority rule the nation, that's when the government is ran by the people. We have referendums, we have initiatives, we have recalls. This is when people are directly able to vote in legislation. Your Janet reading said that critics will say that the average American just isn't knowledgeable enough to understand the ins and outs of our daily government, and so the majoritarian model is a bad idea. It just doesn't work because people are basically clueless. So there's an alternative, and that's the pluralist model. This is still government by the people, but the difference is that it's small pockets of people. It's small pockets of highly focused people on specific interests. Sometimes it could be ethnic similarities, it could be religious beliefs, it could be sexual preferences, it could be some type of an agenda, whatever. A lot of times we call these groups special interest groups, or they represent a special interest group, and because of their extreme focus and their knowledge on that issue, they have a lot of representation or a lot of effect on our legislative branch. So this perspective would argue that democracy works best when these little pockets of people operate separately from the government. And a lot of times they even challenge our government. A lot of things that we've seen pushed through our government throughout the past 100 years happen because of these small groups, these populist groups, whether it's minimum wage, 40-hour work week, women's suffrage, black male suffrage. These types of issues were pushed through by these small focused groups, these pluralist progressive ideas. So there is the shift. The majoritarian model, the mass electorate is the focus. And in the pluralist model, the group is the focus, the specific interest group. So how does that pan out in the United States? Well, Republicans and Democrats are increasingly becoming more majoritarian. They increasingly are representing the views of the masses. Remember the narrow middle that we talked about, where most people fall into. Pluralism really relies on its leaders, and they rely on special knowledge. They rely on some type of method of distributing this knowledge to fan the flames of unrest. And they have these little pockets of unrest that try to get people moving. And we saw that in the last two elections with Ron Paul, a candidate who didn't fit exactly neatly into the Republican Party. A lot of libertarians supported him because of his pluralist ideas, and the method or the vehicle that really moved his campaign was people with special interests in what he was focusing on, and also a focus on social networks and people who had skills in using the internet to get his message across. Now, in a pluralist democracy, minorities rule. And this is different from something that's called elite theory, if you've ever heard of that before. With elite theory, it's what it sounds like. You have a group of elites or a small group of people that are making most of the important decisions. You may have heard this called an oligarchy before. So this might be, and usually is, a very wealthy small group of people. And that is different than a pluralist perspective. Okay? A lot of people say that what keeps the United States from being a true democracy is that we have this elitist group in the United States, or as you read from the vignette, the opening vignette in your Janda book, this We Are the 99%, they would argue that the United States has an oligarchy of corporations that are keeping the United States from having true democracy, that the government's perspective is too swayed by corporations and big business. Anyway, the main thing that I'm wanting you to take out of this is the difference between majority and pluralist perspective. And just to review that, with a majority perspective, you have our government acting on the wishes of the true nation. It is truly government representing the wishes of the people. The threat and the fear is that minority perspectives are limited or snuffed out. So in the pluralist objective, or the pluralist model, you have these small groups of highly motivated, highly specialized political activists who try to get some type of an agenda passed by mobilizing their small numbers in highly effective ways. Okay, now Monday I want to finally talk about political ideology with you. Take the world's smallest political ideology quiz right off the bat and then get moving around the room a little bit. Something else I'd like to get into is hyperpluralism. What happens when we have our country totally, maybe public opinion shifted all over the place because of very active pluralist ideas. And this happens a lot through the media, and I'll show you some examples of that. Okay, so for you guys who are watching this and doing what you're supposed to be doing, you're going to benefit from that. This weekend, with a 1.1 section test, do the multiple choice on the Scantron sheet that I gave you. If for some reason you lost the Scantron sheet, that's not an excuse for not doing it. Still write down your answers on a blank piece of paper, but you better not have lost the Scantron. After the multiple choice questions, though, and you have your essay questions, I don't want a 5-page essay for each one of these questions. This is the first exposure that I've given you to these types of essays. I'm looking for about 2 sentences each. Okay, now for those of you who are extremely motivated and you went ahead and did all 6 of your essays, you're probably cussing me right now because you've written a tome of essays. But really, just to get going, give me about 2 sentences each, or they're about at least 2 sentences, let's say, to get going. So that I kind of know what you're picking up through your readings and what I might need to focus on a little bit more. The Philosophy of Liberty book, or Philosophy of Liberty video that you're going to watch this weekend. Just sit down, maybe pop some popcorn, get you a cup of coffee or something, and check it out. And like I said in class today, maybe it'll help make sense of Locke's political philosophy a little bit more, the difference between state of nature and the reason that we have rule of law, what liberty actually means, and maybe you can kind of pierce through some of that gobbledygook. Okay, so I hope you all have a great weekend. Good job today with Hot Topics. Thanks for being guinea pigs, those of you who hopped into the spots and were willing to talk. And I will see you all on Monday. Have a great weekend.